What's up, guys? Doug Polk here, and we're back for another episode of Poker Hands. And today we're going to be taking a look at a hand from Poker Night in America between myself and Shaun Deeb at 100, 200. But before we jump into that, I want to quickly say I will be streaming the Bankroll Challenge on Twitch today. We're up to $2,400. We started with 100 and we're trying to get to 10,000. If you want to drop by and check it out, you can do so at dougpolk.tv. With that out of the way, let's jump into a little 100, 200 at the Sugar House.
My son loves watching. I mean, he's 3, he has no idea what's going on, but he just screams "Daddy" every few minutes.
My son does that, but I'm usually hitting him.
See, actually, I'm not the only person who says things like that. Thank you for making me
Look better.
Look better.
Yeah,
Just as
yeah,
bad. I don't know.
no.
Our hand begins with me opening my second favorite hand from under the gun +1, Pocket Kings. The action then folds to Jeremy Kaufman, who decides to call in the cutoff with King Jack off. Facing a 3 big blind open, this is a little bit loose. You probably want to either 3-bet or fold, and maybe in general lean towards folding. If you're on the button, I like the flat a lot more because there are less players behind that can squeeze, and you're for sure going to have position after pre-flop, so I wouldn't mind it on the button, but in the cutoff, it's a little bit loose. The action then folds to Shaun Deeb in the big blind, who decides to make a call here with Queen 10, definitely the standard play, and we take a flop.
Chicka.
The flop comes Jack 9-6, and in the biz we call this an action flop. I flop an overpair, Jeremy flops top pair second kicker, and Shaun Deeb flops an open-end straight draw to the nuts on both sides. Everyone's got a good-sized piece, but I'm currently in the lead with my pocket kings. Deeb checks, and I decide to bet here on the flop with kings, which is certainly important. This is not the time to slow play. My opponents can certainly have a bunch of equity against me, and I want to narrow the field preferably down to one player, hopefully the big blind because I'm in position. So I go ahead and bet around 2/3 pot, 1150, and the action's over to Jeremy with top pair second kicker. Now, in spots like this, you don't want to get too carried away with your hand and think about value raising. You can certainly be up against overpairs and sets, and the big blind can also have a couple of hands that beat you too, although that's pretty rare. He decides to flat here, which is definitely the right play.
Make it 1175. That, yes. What, that's not a legal raise? 25 bucks?
Oh yeah, and just a quick note, if someone says make it a certain amount, and it's not enough to be double the size of the bet, a minimum raise, then the way that they decide if it's legal or not is it over the halfway point? So let's say I bet $1,000 and someone makes it 1,400, it gets rounded down to a call because the halfway point is 500. If they say make it 1,600, it gets rounded up to 2,000 because it's over the halfway point. I'm not exactly sure what happens at exactly half. Hasn't really happened before, but just a little bit of information for you guys.
We need Ashley. I mean, all of us need Ashley except for Dougie.
Raise. 37.
Now in the big blind, Shaun has an interesting decision with Queen 10. In general, when you have straight draws in the big blind facing this action, you should mainly call the flop. The reason is if you start raising all of your straight draws, you're going to way over bluff. Your value hands here are hands like Jack 9 or Jack 6 or 9-6 or maybe 6s or 9s. But there's a lot less combos of those hands because there's a Jack 9 and 6 on the board. Your bluff hands could be hands like Queen 10 or Queen 8 or King Queen or 10 8 or 10 7 or 8 7 or 8 5 or 7 5. So as you can see, there are a lot of different straight draws here, and you have to be selective with which ones you want to raise. With all those things in mind, Queen 10 should be one of your favorite hands to raise because it draws to the nuts on both sides, which is really good, especially on an offsuit board like this one. And then also, you're most likely going to block some of the hands that could continue from your opponents. So I like his decision to come in for the check raise here. I just want to say if you're always raising with your open-enders here, you could have Queen 10, 10 8, or 8 7. That's simply going to end up being too many hands, so you want to be selective and sometimes raise with these holdings. Now over to me with pocket kings, I have a pretty clear call. There's really no merit in folding or raising, and if I'm saying that, you know it's true. Over to Jeremy after I call, he's got a pretty tough decision with King Jack. While top pair is pretty good, he can be beat in a couple of places. The big blind could have any of the hands listed before, Jack 9, Jack 6, 9 6, 9s, or 6s, and the player that opened is going to have queens plus, maybe some sets sometimes as well, so he's only really ahead if both players are on a draw or if the under the gun player has a hand like Queen Jack. So I think Jeremy laying his top pair down here was actually a very good play considering the ranges of both players, and we take a turn.
So much money. We played 300, 600 stud.
That 3-6 is still going.
In the 90s. Wow, what a game.
I can imagine.
Just don't have time, you know, like,
Where are you living?
NorCal, Palo Alto.
Living the life, bro. Living the life, man.
It's a very nice life.
The turn comes an offsuit 4, which is a brick for Shaun Deeb. Now in the big blind with Queen 10, he's got a little bit of an awkward situation. If he bets and gets jammed on, it's going to suck for his hand. And if he checks and faces a bet, he can't really check call because it doesn't have the showdown value to do so, and he's not really going to get the odds against any kind of reasonable bet. So I think he has two options he could consider here with Queen 10. He could bet again, which I prefer, or he can go ahead and go for the check raise to get me to maybe bet fold a hand like maybe a King Queen backdoor flush draw, or my own Queen 10, or my own 10-8 suited or 8-7 suited, which are some of the weaker hands I can have when I bet call the flop. But if you do check and face a bet, you're going to have to check raise because you're just not getting the odds on a call. Deeb eventually does decide to check, and the action's over to me with pocket kings. Now with kings, this is a little bit of an interesting spot. I think on one hand, you could argue to bet a lot of your hands here because your range is going to be polarized because I bet the flop and called a raise. I'm either going to have a strong showdown hand or some kind of draw. And in general, you do want to be betting aggressively in position. The thing is, if you always bet here, then players out of position can trap you by checking on the turn, knowing they're going to get a bet and can jam. So what I would recommend here is to mainly bet with most of your hands, but look to check a couple showdown hands back, particularly ones that you think can't get any value or have removal you don't like, and then also check a couple draws back to bluff the river. Anyway, I go ahead and bet here with pocket kings, and the action's back over to Shaun Deeb.
Matt, that's the only problem with 1-2. Everybody tries harder. Everybody tries a little harder.
Now on the turn, when Shaun does check and face a bet 53-50, he needs about 25% equity to be able to call profitably. Now when he gets there, he's likely to overrealize by sometimes stacking me, but he also is out of position, so it makes it a little bit worse because he's not always going to get to extract that value. Now, he has 16% chance to hit a straight in the river, which will be the nuts unless the backdoor flush gets there. But he also does have 6% chance to hit top pair on a queen, which will sometimes put him into the lead, although I don't know how often that's really going to happen. I kind of have to have a hand like ace-jack or king-jack myself. So when he calls here out of position on the turn, I'm pretty sure he's going to be losing money with this play. I can't see this being a plus EV long-term play, and I'd recommend to either go for the raise or the fold if you do check the turn. Anyway, Deeb goes ahead and calls, and let's take a river.
All in.
The river is an offsuit 4, which is a great card for my pocket kings. The only way I beat here is if Deeb has a hand like 6-6 or 9-9 and decided to trap the turn, which is a little bit unlikely I think on this board as well, or if he somehow rivered a very wacky 4x hand, but that's not really even possible because he's not going to check raise check call bottom pair on the turn. So this card is amazing for me as it counterfeits hands like Jack 9 or Jack 6 or 9-6 if he did decide to check raise and check call the turn. Once Deeb checks to me, well, my decision here is pretty easy. It's time to jam, and I can work in bluffs like Queen 10 suited or 10-8 suited. You know, I was a little harsh here on Deeb's turn call, and maybe I've been a little too harsh on a lot of players that play a little bit more of an exploitative style, like Torelli, like Negreanu, a lot of these guys that play poker not as much on the fundamental side and a little more on the exploitative side. And frankly, I can see this playstyle being better than theory in a lot of situations. I think in the future, I might try and add some of that into my game. I just don't think that this turn is the spot to do it. When you're playing against recreational players, you don't really have to have theoretically balanced ranges because you're going to get the money just by figuring out what they're up to and making moves. In fact, sometimes if you can make an especially good move, you can soul read them enough to get away from big hands and also stack them in thin spots. Having a good fundamental basis for poker is nice, but if you try and take that too far and apply it to poker when playing against recreational players or pros with a lot of live tells, you can end up in a bad spot. Theory can only take you so far, especially when you start playing in small stakes games. Players won't fold and your strategy you're trying to use won't end up being very good. In spots like that, you kind of have to ditch the ranges you've been putting together and lean towards a value-heavy style and base a lot of it around your reads on those individual players. If they're a nit, then you gotta bluff a little bit, but not too much, because at small stakes, people still will pay you off lightly. If they're a laggy player, you wanna make sure not bluff them and only value bet and go big so that you get paid more often. I would say at the end of the day, it's gonna be April 2nd, and you can disregard the last 2 minutes.
All in.
That laydown hurt.
Just play good poker, guys, and eventually, you get the money. Thank you for joining me today for Poker Hints, and if you are new around here, make sure to hit that sub button. Also, if you're watching this the day this video came out, I will be streaming on Twitch at 2 p.m. PST. The link will be in the description below. Stop by and check it out.